The sun glared off the endless rows of beige stucco homes. I stood at the edge of a development that did not exist 2 years ago, on land I'd inherited yet scarcely recognized. My name is Zachary Moss. I'm 39 years old, and I grew up raising cattle and growing pecan trees with my father on this very soil. Once upon a time, a wide-open ranch stretched across these fields, dotted with wild mesquite and rolling patches of desert flora. Now, there were symmetrical sidewalks, identical mailboxes, and a gaudy sign that read, "Welcome to Elmwood Springs, a Horizon Crest HOA community." I could feel my pulse throbbing as a question hammered inside my head. How did a homeowners association manage to build 120 houses on my property without my consent? I parked my truck near what used to be my father's workshop. Where I expected to see weather-worn planks and sun-bleached memories, I now saw a cul-de-sac lined with hybrid sedans and SUVs. There was an unnerving stillness, broken only by the mechanical hum of an air conditioning unit. The place looked brand new. It smelled of fresh paint and manufactured perfection. As I took in the sight, my heart sank. My father had passed away 3 years ago. He left me the entire ranch in his will. But I'd spent most of that time traveling for my job as an agricultural consultant, trusting that the land would remain untouched until I returned. Now, I felt a flash of guilt. I'd been gone too long. I needed answers. My first stop was the newly built administration office near a row of houses that looked like copy-paste versions of each other, right down to the decorative rocks in the front yard. A tall fence surrounded the complex and an electronic gate blocked the main entrance. A security guard stepped out of a small booth, scanning me with a disapproving frown. He wore a polo emblazoned with the Horizon Crest logo. I took a breath and spoke calmly. "I'm here to see whoever's in charge. This land belongs to me. I need to know why you've built an entire subdivision on it." The guard blinked, looked me up and down, then muttered something into his radio. A moment later, the gate whirred open, allowing me inside. The office building was a single-story structure made of polished stone and glass. It was sleek, modern, and out of place in the dusty outskirts of town. A receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile that faltered as soon as I explained who I was. I noticed how her fingers tightened around a pen. Her expression turned uneasy. She told me to wait, then disappeared into a back room. Several minutes passed before a woman emerged, poised, impeccably dressed, and carrying a leather folder under one arm, her eyes lit with a blend of caution and curiosity. She introduced herself as Penelope Voss, the president of Horizon Crest HOA. "Mr. Moss," she said, voice as smooth as silk. "I've been expecting you to show up eventually. Please, follow me to my office." She offered a polite smile, then led me down a corridor adorned with framed posters of desert sunsets and meticulously landscaped homes. Every step I took resonated with bitterness. The reality felt surreal. This place, this modern labyrinth, was sitting on top of what used to be a spread of open land that I once walked with my father. Her office had a large window overlooking the development. From that vantage, I saw the uniform rooftops stretching toward the horizon. She gestured for me to sit across from her sleek metal desk. A faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. She wasted no time opening the leather folder. "I assume you're here about the property dispute," she said. Her tone was friendly, but there was an undercurrent of unwavering confidence. "It's not a dispute," I snapped, trying to contain the anger that churned in my gut. "This is my family's ranch. My father bought and paid for it over 3 decades ago. So I'd like to know how on earth your organization managed to build 120 houses here without my permission." She leaned forward, folding her hands neatly. "I understand your concerns. Our records show that you, as the legal owner, were sent multiple notifications regarding a proposed annexation. We received no response. Therefore, under the provisions of Redwood County's Land Development Act, we proceeded with the assumption that the land was abandoned." I fought to keep my voice level. Abandoned? I've been paying taxes on this land. I never relinquished ownership. That alone should invalidate your entire argument. I watched her expression remain calm, unperturbed. Penelope nodded sympathetically. Her carefully arranged hair didn't move at all. I hear you, but we have documents that show attempts at notification. We followed the letter of the law. It isn't our responsibility to track you down if your mailing address changed. As for taxes, the county recognized the annexation once the necessary permits were granted. I'm sure you understand how local governance can be. A wave of fury flashed through me, but I caught myself. Who authorized all these permits? She smiled. An expression that suggested she'd had this conversation before. Everything was approved by Commissioner Goddard and the Redwood County Planning Committee. You'll find that our development is legitimate. Now, if you'd like to negotiate a settlement or some sort of compensation arrangement, we might be able to come to an agreement. Her composure stung. She acted as if I were a mild inconvenience, an unprepared claimant without a leg to stand on. But she didn't know me. She had no idea that my father was an attorney who specialized in property disputes. Before his passing, he taught me countless lessons on how to handle unscrupulous tactics. Admittedly, I was no lawyer, but I knew enough to see through a sham. I rose from the chair, ignoring the slight tremble in my hands. I'll be in touch, I said, forcing an icy politeness into my voice. Don't count on me rolling over. I left the office, stepping back into the sun-bleached parking lot. Rage simmered under my skin. My father had always told me, when dealing with land sharks, never let them see you sweat. I repeated those words in my head as I climbed into my truck. On the drive back into town, I mulled over everything Penelope had said, mentally cataloging her claims. I needed to see the county clerk's records, figure out exactly how the annexation was pushed through. There had to be a paper trail, legal or not. It would reveal every trick they used. Early the next morning, I visited the Redwood County Courthouse, a nondescript building with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. The clerk on duty, a tired-looking man with thick glasses, directed me to the public records room. Within an hour, I was scanning through a labyrinth of digital entries, searching for any mention of Elmwood Springs or Horizon Crest. What I found was puzzling and frustrating. Yes, there were documents referencing an annexation, but the address they had for me was some P.O. box in Illinois. I'd never lived or worked in Illinois, never used that address in my life. On top of that, the annexation file was suspiciously sparse. Key forms were missing, replaced by notes that simply said, "Approved with conditions." My father's voice echoed in my mind. Missing documents are often more telling than the ones you find. They must have intentionally omitted details that showed the annexation was a sham. As I dug deeper, I discovered the name of a county commissioner, Edwin Goddard, on nearly every approval for Horizon Crest's development. Goddard had signed off on a flurry of permits, zoning changes, environmental impact waivers, and land incorporation requests. It was a staggering display of power. More tellingly, the timeline was rushed. Documents were stamped and dated within days of each other, something that rarely happens in normal bureaucracy. It stank of favoritism and corruption. I stepped outside to clear my head. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, and I felt sweat bead on my forehead as I fished my phone from my pocket. If I was going to fight this, I needed a plan. I needed allies, information, and legal counsel. My father had passed on, but his old colleague, a retired judge named Winston Carver, still lived in the area. Perhaps he could help me navigate the next steps. I called and set up a meeting at his home that evening. Judge Carver lived on the outskirts of Redwood County in a modest, ranch-style house overlooking some dusty hills. His porch creaked as I stepped onto it. He greeted me with a warm handshake, though his gaze tightened with concern when I told him about the HOA building on my land. Over mugs of iced tea, I showed him the copies of the records I'd gathered. He flipped through them with a growing frown. "This is bigger than just an HOA overstepping," he said, tapping one page that bore Commissioner Goddard's signature. This looks like a systematic approach, a premeditated plan to target land belonging to absent owners, then push through development at lightning speed. Could be money under the table, could be a ring of real estate profiteers. Whatever it is, it's not clean. So what do? I asked, struggling to keep the frustration from my voice. He shrugged gently. His gaze was steady. You gather proof, documentation, testimonies, anything that shows they knowingly circumvented the law. If you can prove they used a fake address for notifications and bribed officials, you can tear down their legal standing, but it won't be easy. These people are usually well-funded, well-connected. As we talked, I remembered seeing a rumor on a local message board about the Redwood County Planning Committee ignoring environmental studies. My father's ranch was home to a variety of desert wildlife. Could it be that they'd concealed some environmental hazards or disrupted protected species habitats? If so, that would be one more nail in their coffin. I left Judge Carver's place with renewed resolve. The following day, I decided to drive around the edges of the newly built community. I spotted a piece of fence line that had been ripped out near a dry creek bed where my father and I used to fish during monsoon season. Now there was a row of houses with neatly fenced backyards. That's when I saw a note stapled to a wooden post. Environmental survey pending, construction not approved past this point. It looked old, battered, and torn at the edges. Possibly someone had tried to hide it. I felt a spark of hope. If I could find out who issued that notice, maybe they'd have more evidence of wrongdoing. The name on the notice was an environmental consulting firm called Sage Rock Assessments. I wrote it down. Maybe these folks had come out here, found something that the HOA didn't want publicized, and were subsequently ignored. The puzzle pieces were starting to align. As I circled back, I noticed a small group of homeowners chatting in a cul-de-sac. They looked a bit out of place for a brand new community, a gray-haired couple and a man in his 30s with a toddler in his arms. I pulled over and approached them cautiously, introducing myself. I figured they might recognize me from the gate camera or the office fiasco. Sure enough, the younger man said, "You're the guy who claims this land was his. Penelope told us not to worry about you, that you're trying to cause trouble." I suppressed a bitter chuckle. I guess she would say that. Listen, if you don't mind my asking, did the HOA charge you any special fees or mention anything about the property's status when you purchased your home? The gray-haired woman frowned. We were told it was fully approved farmland converted to residential zoning, no red flags. But I'll be honest, we paid a premium, something called a fast-track development fee that was tacked onto the closing costs. None of it made sense, but the HOA rep insisted it was normal for new builds. Now we hear rumors about environmental issues and missing documentation. Her husband chimed in. We tried to ask about the farmland history and the sales rep brushed it off. We moved here for retirement. We don't want to be part of any illegal scheme. The younger man with the toddler looked nervous. We sank our savings into this place. If it turns out the deeds are invalid, we're screwed. The tension in their voices confirmed that the shady dealings harmed not just me, but also these unsuspecting families. They were essentially pawns in a bigger game. I thanked them for their time and gave them my number. If you find anything suspicious or if you have documents that mention the farmland's real ownership, please let me know. They nodded reluctantly. An hour later, my phone buzzed. The man with the toddler was calling. "Listen," he said in a hushed tone, "my name's Tyler. I didn't want to say this in front of the others, but I kept copies of all the paperwork. I've also got emails from the mortgage company. The HOA told me not to share them, but I'm starting to think I should." My heart leapt. He agreed to meet me at a cafe outside the development that evening. When we met, Tyler slid a thumb drive across the table and cradled his daughter with one arm. "I just want to protect my family. I'm not looking for trouble, but if something illegal is happening, I won't be part of a cover-up." I thanked him sincerely. Later that night, I opened the files on my laptop. They included some PDF scans of contracts, email exchanges between Tyler and the HOA's property manager, as well as a few planning documents that indicated the farmland had been rezoned in record time. Among them, I found an internal email chain, apparently forwarded to Tyler by mistake, that mentioned the name Commissioner Godard repeatedly, referencing his helpful push in waiving environmental guidelines. It also mentioned a last-minute approval from a so-called Penelope V. That had to be Penelope Voss. The more I scrolled, the more outraged I became. One message suggested forging signatures on an environmental clearance form. It read, "We have to finalize these documents by next Tuesday or we risk a site inspection. Let's expedite the sign-off. If you can't get it done legitimately, do what you must." Another email boasted about circumventing the normal 2-month waiting period by paying an expedition fee that was never documented in the official ledger. My mind whirled. If I could tie this directly to Penelope, or show that she orchestrated it, I might have enough to bring the whole operation down. But I needed professional guidance to ensure every piece was admissible in court. That's when I decided to reach out to an environmental lawyer named Marion Green, whose name I'd encountered in local newspaper archives. She'd once won a major lawsuit against a factory dumping waste in a nearby river. If this development had broken environmental regulations, Marion was the best ally I could hope for. We scheduled a meeting at her modest law office on the edge of Redwood County. Stepping inside her office felt like walking into a library, with shelves full of binders marked with case numbers. Marion greeted me with a firm handshake. Her eyes radiated confidence. I explained the situation, showing her the partial evidence I'd collected so far. She asked pointed questions, scribbling notes. Finally, she pushed her reading glasses higher on her nose and said, "Zachary, you might have a multifaceted case. Property fraud, environmental violation, and potentially racketeering if there's a network of corruption. But the environmental angle is the most immediate way to halt further construction. If we prove they disregarded protected species or wetlands, we can get an immediate injunction." I exhaled, feeling a spark of hope. "So there's a path forward." She nodded. "Definitely, but we need more direct proof that they knew about the environmental concerns and chose to ignore them. Have you heard of Sage Rock Assessments? They're an ecology group that filed a partial report on this ranch a while back. If we can find that full report, it could be a game changer." I admitted I'd only found a torn notice from them. She suggested I reach out to Sage Rock's main office, see if anyone was willing to talk. If that didn't work, she might be able to subpoena records. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then slipped it into her pocket. "Let's coordinate soon. Every day we wait, the HOA might be destroying evidence." That same afternoon, I called Sage Rock's office repeatedly. At first, I got a series of automated messages. Then, just as I was about to give up, a gravelly voice answered, "Sage Rock Assessments, George speaking." I introduced myself briefly, explaining that I owned the ranch in Redwood County where the Elmwood Springs development now stood. The silence on the other end felt loaded. George finally said, "I can't talk about that project over the phone. Too sensitive. But if you're who you say you are, maybe we should meet in person." We agreed to meet that weekend at a small diner on the outskirts of Redwood County. George turned out to be a middle-aged field biologist with sun-leathered skin and a no-nonsense attitude. He arrived carrying a battered briefcase. We found a booth in a corner, away from prying ears. Once we settled, he produced a manila folder that looked as though it had been through a sandstorm. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, photographs of burrowing owl nests, and references to ephemeral wetlands that formed during the monsoon season. "We surveyed your ranch area about 1.5 years ago," he said. "Found evidence that at least 6 pairs of burrowing owls nested there. We recommended a thorough environmental impact study to the Redwood County Planning Office. Next thing we knew, we got a phone call telling us our services were no longer required and our partial report was never finalized. We never saw an official condemnation, but we suspected something was fishy. I flipped through the papers, stunned by the detail. The photos clearly showed owl burrows near the creek bed. Did they pay you off to keep quiet? He shook his head. No, they just terminated our contract. We got a partial fee, then they said they were going with a different firm. We tried to follow up with the county, nobody returned our calls. When we realized the development was going up anyway, we guessed they'd found a more cooperative environmental consultant. I studied a photograph of an owl chick peering out from a burrow, feeling a wave of sadness. My father would have been furious if he knew they destroyed that habitat. George leaned forward, lowering his voice. The local planning office might have the official draft of our report. If that emerges, they'll have a lot to answer for. I thanked him for taking the risk to share that information. He shrugged. I just want the truth out. We do these studies because the desert is fragile. If we let unscrupulous developers run wild, we'll lose entire species. It's not just about one ranch. It's about the principle. Driving home, I thought about how best to use this new trove of evidence. Marion had been right. If we linked this environment data to official records, we could freeze further development, and it might strengthen the property fraud angle as well. The next day, I called her, and we agreed to file for an emergency injunction combining the evidence of a forged annexation with the disregard for the owl habitat. If the court granted it, Penelope's entire operation would grind to a halt. She'd be forced to defend her actions in front of a judge. Sure enough, as soon as our legal team submitted the injunction request, Penelope fired back with a barrage of legal motions, claiming we were endangering the property rights of numerous innocent homeowners and manufacturing an environmental crisis. Her language was sharp, painting me as a troublemaker, with no regard for people who'd invested their life savings in these homes. In a sense, that was her biggest card, leveraging the fear and uncertainty of residents to cast me as the villain. Yet if I did nothing, this injustice would go unpunished, and more people could be exploited down the line. The hearing date arrived. The courthouse hallway buzzed with tension. I saw Penelope conversing quietly with a tall, broad-shouldered man in a suit that screamed money. Presumably her top-notch legal counsel. Commissioner Goddard skulked near a pillar, trying to appear uninvolved, but his presence spoke volumes. On my side, I had Marion and the moral support of Judge Carver. Even Tyler showed up, baby in tow, nodding at me from across the hallway as if to say, "I'm with you." When the hearing began, Marion presented our evidence with a clarity that commanded the room's attention. She explained how the annexation was pushed through using a fabricated address for me, how the Redwood County records were incomplete, how Sage Rock's environmental study had been ignored. She showed the photos of the owl nests, hammered on the possibility of an endangered species violation, and quoted the relevant statutes. The judge's expression grew increasingly serious. When it was Penelope's turn to respond, she gave a polished speech about how Horizon Crest had followed every necessary step and how they deeply sympathized with my surprise, but insisted I'd abandoned the property. She dismissed the environmental concerns as exaggerated claims from a disgruntled consultant who was replaced for subpar work. Her presentation exuded confidence, but I could see a flicker of unease in her eyes when Marion introduced the emails from the thumb drive, particularly the one hinting at forging an environmental clearance form. The judge took a recess, then returned with a ruling that gave us a partial victory. An injunction halted any further construction or sales in Elmwood Springs until a full investigation could be conducted. Meanwhile, the existing homeowners would remain in place, but the HOA was restricted from collecting certain fees. The judge also demanded the Redwood County Planning Office provide a complete record of the annexation process, no pages missing. Penelope's face remained impassive, but I could sense a current of anger behind her polished facade. Within days, Redwood County was in an uproar. Residents of Elmwood Springs were furious at the prospect that their homes might be built on shaky legal ground, while Penelope's associates scrambled to spin the narrative. A few local news outlets picked up the story, labeling it a David versus Goliath battle over land rights. My phone rang incessantly. Some calls were from supportive community members, while others were from unknown numbers spewing threats. I recorded every threatening message just in case. In the following weeks, we uncovered more incriminating details. A whistleblower at the county's record office sent us scanned copies of internal memos showing that Commissioner Goddard explicitly instructed staff to fast-track the annexation for Elmwood Springs and to avoid further environmental delays. Another memo listed questionable payments from Horizon Crest LLC to Goddard's re-election fund. The entire picture was one of corruption at multiple levels, orchestrated by Penelope and her cronies. Then, out of nowhere, a slender woman in her early 40s knocked on my motel door one evening. She introduced herself as Eva, an accountant who used to work for the Redwood County Finance Department. Her voice shook slightly as she explained she had proof of bribes disguised as planning fees. She'd grown a conscience, or more likely, realized that the situation was about to explode and wanted to be on the right side of it. She handed me a plain USB drive. This has records of all questionable transactions tied to Elmwood Springs. Don't tell anyone you got it from me. I stared at the drive in disbelief. Why come to me? I asked, a semicolon of skepticism in my tone. Because my job's on the line and they'll bury me if this gets traced back, she whispered, casting a nervous glance down the corridor. But I can't stand by and watch innocent families be swindled out of their life savings. You're fighting back, so maybe you'll know what to do with this. The next morning I reviewed the drive's contents with Marianne. It was explosive stuff. Wire transfers, spreadsheets linking campaign contributions, big sums flowing from an account labeled HC Development Fund straight into Goddard's personal coffers. Some entries were thinly veiled under code names, but the amounts and timing matched suspiciously well with the approvals for the annexation. We had a potential RICO case on our hands if we could show an ongoing pattern of racketeering activity. Marion was nearly speechless at the scope of it. We decided to involve the State Attorney General's office, sending them a carefully compiled dossier of the evidence. Within days, investigators descended on Redwood County, interviewing staff, subpoenaing documents, and sending a clear message that the cover-up was unraveling. Commissioner Goddard vanished from public view. Rumors flew that he was cutting a deal with investigators to implicate Penelope in exchange for leniency. The tension was palpable. Meanwhile, Elmwood Springs residents held heated meetings demanding answers from the HOA. One late afternoon, I passed the development's gate just as two police cruisers pulled out, followed by a black SUV with tinted windows. My gut told me they were collecting evidence or possibly searching the administrative office. Sure enough, by nightfall, local news ran a piece titled, "Horizon Crest Under Investigation. Alleged Fraud and Environmental Violations." A newscaster recapped the story of how an HOA had built 120 homes on land belonging to a man returning to claim his inheritance, only to uncover deeper corruption. My phone vibrated with messages of support from old friends who saw the segment. For the first time, I felt the public tide turning in my favor. Still, Penelope was no pushover. Through her high-powered legal team, she continued to wage a public relations campaign, painting me as a heartless opportunist threatening to kick families out of their homes. The stress weighed on me heavily. Some nights, I hardly slept, worrying about what would happen to these residents if the courts voided their deeds. But I reminded myself that the blame lay squarely on Penelope and her accomplices. They were the ones who built on stolen land. If I didn't stand up now, who would? Eventually, the grand jury convened to review the evidence for potential criminal charges. Commissioner Goddard was subpoenaed. People whispered that he might spill everything to save his own skin. In a swirl of frantic moves, Penelope tried to offload certain assets, presumably bracing for legal fallout. She even put her lavish home on the market. Rumor had it she was planning to flee the state if things went sour, but she couldn't outrun the investigations forever. Amid this chaos, I remembered something my father said about the best revenge being to uphold what's right, not just to punish what's wrong. I began formulating a plan to help the new homeowners salvage something. provided they were willing to stand with me in exposing the HOA's corruption. We scheduled a community meeting in a church basement just outside Elmwood Springs, inviting anyone who felt misled. About 30 people showed up, anxious and angry. Some recognized me from the news, others had heard rumors. I stood in front, feeling the weight of their hopes. First off, and said, "I'm not here to kick anybody out. I'm here to reclaim the ranch that was stolen from me by fraudulent tactics. You deserve to know the truth. The documents we've uncovered show that Penelope and Commissioner Goddard conspired to bypass key regulations and forge critical notices. You were sold homes on land the HOA never legally owned, but my fight isn't with you, it's with the people who put us all in this mess. If we unite, we can force them to answer for their actions. My lawyer and I will do everything we can to ensure you're compensated or provided a fair path to stay, if that's what you want." Some looked skeptical, others relieved. An older woman said tearfully, "We're on fixed incomes. If our deeds are invalid, do we lose everything?" Marian stepped up beside me and explained the legal process. If the deeds are declared void, it doesn't automatically mean you're evicted. The court may decide that the developers, the real culprits, owe you refunds or damages. There are precedents where defrauded homeowners were given the option to purchase the land legally from the rightful owner at fair market rates, not the inflated price. That's all down the line, though. The first step is holding these wrongdoers accountable. A hush fell over the room. Then Tyler, the young father, stood up. "Zachary's been straightforward with us from the start. I trust him a lot more than I trust that fancy office. I say we support the investigation, give statements if needed, and stand together." A handful of nods rippled through the crowd. It was a small but critical sign that the residents were willing to see me as a partner rather than an enemy. The next morning, Commissioner Goddard was arrested on suspicion of bribery and conspiracy to commit fraud. The charges were sealed, but rumors flew. My phone beeped with a text from an unknown number. "Watch your back. Penelope won't go down alone." A cold shiver traced my spine, but I refused to be intimidated. If anything, that threat confirmed we were close to toppling their scheme. A few days later, I learned through a friend in law enforcement that Penelope had been indicted as well. Her mugshot was plastered on local news channels. The once poised HOA president stared blankly at the camera, her hair disheveled. The charge sheet mentioned money laundering, racketeering, environmental fraud, and more. Investigations uncovered that she'd orchestrated multiple land grabs under the banner of Horizon Crest in other counties, all using the same annexation ruse with absentee owners. My father's ranch was just the tip of the iceberg. With Penelope in custody and Goddard apparently ready to turn state's witness, the final pieces fell into place. The Redwood County judge handling our civil suit declared that the entire Elmwood Springs development was built on a foundation of fraud. Under the law, improvements made without the true owner's consent belonged to the owner, meaning I technically owned those 120 houses. However, the judge recognized that innocent families lived there. The court indicated it would supervise a fair resolution, likely forcing the guilty parties to compensate both me and the residents. It was a monumental ruling, one that validated everything I'd fought for. Standing outside the courthouse after the decision, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. Yes, I'd reclaimed my land, but the orchard was gone, the wildlife disturbed, and neighbors were left in limbo. A swarm of reporters thrust microphones at me, asking for statements. I spoke carefully, acknowledging the heartbreak inflicted on unsuspecting homeowners, and emphasizing that corruption was the true villain. Marian stood next to me, adding that stronger laws were needed to prevent HOAs from running amok. In the months that followed, the state attorney general pressed formal charges against Penelope, Commissioner Goddard, and half a dozen others implicated in the bribery scheme. More victims came forward from nearby counties, claiming their properties had been annexed under suspicious circumstances. A wave of lawsuits ensued, shining a spotlight on systemic flaws in land use regulation. Environmental agencies got involved, investigating how Redwood County had signed off on developments in known owl habitats. Fines were issued, officials were fired. The entire region underwent a reckoning. For the homeowners in Elmwood Springs, the court appointed a special mediator to sort out the mess. With my input, we crafted a plan that allowed them to stay, if they chose, by purchasing the lots at fair market value from me, minus any portion they already paid to the fraudulent developers. Some accepted, relieved to have legal certainty. Others, too disillusioned to remain, opted for buyouts, funded by the confiscated assets of Horizon Crest. Over time, the houses lost their uniform glitz as residents personalized them, planting trees, changing paint colors, and ironically, shaping a more authentic community than Penelope ever envisioned. I, in turn, used a portion of the settlement money to restore parts of the land that had not yet been built upon. With George's guidance, I reintroduced native plants and constructed a small wildlife corridor to encourage the return of burrowing owls, as well as other desert species. It would take time, but the desert is resilient if given half a chance. There was a quiet, profound satisfaction in that effort. I could feel my father's presence, a sense of peace that our ranch was, in some measure, getting back its soul. One bright morning, I found myself standing at the edge of a replanted area, scanning the horizon. The bland uniformity of the new houses ended a few hundred yards away, replaced by the scruffy earth and cacti typical of the Sonoran Desert. A single burrowing owl perched on a makeshift post. I stared at it, wondering if it sensed that the land was under new, or rather old, management. A moment later, it darted off in a flutter of wings. Behind me, Tyler approached, holding his now toddling daughter. He looked out at the open space, nodded, and said, "I wanted to thank you for what you did, even though it's been tough on everybody. We've decided to stay. This place means a lot to us now, thanks to you fighting so hard for it." I gave him a small, grateful smile. "Just doing what's right. I hope it can be a good home for you and your family. You ever need help, you know where to find me." He gave me a knowing look. "I suspect we might see you around more often now that you've got your own property back." I glanced at the reclaimed land, the orchard that had been plowed under, and the desert beyond. "Yeah," I said softly, "it's good to be home." Life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the shadow of the scandal lingered for a while. Penelope's trial was a media spectacle. She appeared in court wearing the same confident posture she had in her office, but with none of the control. Witness after witness testified to her schemes. Emails, phone calls, backroom deals. Goddard cut a plea bargain, turning over reams of evidence that implicated them both in a network of bribery that extended beyond Redwood County. The jury deliberated for 2 days before finding her guilty on multiple counts. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, her empire of fraudulent developments in tatters. Seeing her led away in handcuffs was a sobering sight, but I felt no joy in her downfall, only relief that justice was served. In a separate hearing, the state required Horizon Crest to pay hefty fines for environmental violations. A portion of those funds was allocated to local conservation groups. George's firm, Sage Rock Assessments, received a grant to continue their work studying and protecting desert wildlife habitats. It felt like cosmic justice that the very money Penelope and her associates hoarded would now be used to heal the land they nearly destroyed. Laws changed too. Redwood County revised its permit process, making it harder for HOAs to annex land without rigorous public oversight and verified owner consent. With the legal battles winding down, I was finally able to focus on something beyond fighting. I began restoring part of the farmland, planting a row of pecan saplings near the old creek. I didn't expect to recreate the ranch as it once was. Too many changes had already swept across this place. But I wanted to honor my father's legacy in some small way. On weekends, I'd bring a shovel, a watering can, and a stack of memories. The soil felt different under my boots, but it was still ours. Sometimes I'd see a homeowner walking their dog along the edge of the development. We'd exchange a wave or a nod. One day, the older couple I met at the cul-de-sac early on came by to chat. They were staying too, determined to live out their retirement in a place they now felt had a genuine sense of neighborly connection, forged through adversity. They told me about a small community garden project some of the residents started. While they were planting tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, I found it poignant that the land Penelope stole to create a hollow, profit-driven neighborhood might evolve into a community that valued authenticity and cooperation instead. Months slid into a year, and Redwood County's attention shifted to other stories. The vacant lots in Elmwood Springs either lay dormant or were converted into pocket parks. Nobody wanted to resume the construction that had been tainted by scandal. Commissioner Goddard, out on bail pending sentencing, was seldom seen in public. People whispered that he'd soon have a matching jumpsuit like Penelope's. Tyler and a few other young parents organized a weekend cleanup, collecting trash left behind by construction crews near the creek bed. I joined them, and as I walked along the water's edge, I felt the swirl of memory. My father teaching me to fish here, the scorching sun overhead, the glint of water reflecting the infinite sky. Life flowed onward. New chapters began even where the old ones ended in heartbreak. One crisp morning, I sat on the tailgate of my truck, sipping coffee as the sunrise painted the desert in pink and gold. A faint call of an owl echoed in the distance. In that moment, I realized how far we'd come from the day I first laid eyes on those beige houses, anger boiling in my veins. Victory wasn't just about winning a court case or sending criminals to prison. It was about restoring balance, forging a future where justice shaped the land's destiny instead of corruption. I thought of my father, picturing him leaning on a fence post, tipping his hat with a half smile as he watched me navigate the world. Pride glimmered behind his gentle eyes in my imagination. The scandal had taught me that the law could be twisted by those with money and influence, but it could also be harnessed by ordinary people, determined to stand up for what was right. I learned that communities, even hastily built ones, held true potential if folks decided to care for each other. And I discovered that no scheme, no matter how cunning, could completely uproot the spirit of a place if there were still enough hearts willing to fight for it. I stayed out on the ranch indefinitely, dividing my time between my consultant work and the steady process of replanting. Marion visited on occasion, checking up on the environmental project. We'd walk the property, noting which species returned, watching the new pecan saplings show signs of life. She once joked that maybe I should start an honest HOA for the orchard area, a concept that made us both laugh. The entire notion of an HOA had been tainted by Penelope's corruption, yet I knew not all such associations were inherently evil. It was the people behind them, greedy or honest, who shaped their character. In time, the orchard blossomed again. While not as expansive as before, it still carried the spirit of what my father and I once cultivated. Burrowing owls made cautious returns, and I occasionally spotted them flitting about at dusk, their curious eyes reflecting the last rays of sun. The community that formed at Elmwood Springs slowly united, neighbors bonding over shared relief that the nightmares of legal uncertainty had ended. I was no longer seen as the potential victor, but as the rightful landowner who had, against all odds, fought a corrupt machine. As for Penelope, the headlines eventually faded. She'd appealed her sentence but lost, so she remained in prison, a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition and dishonesty collide. I heard rumors that she still blamed me for her downfall, refusing to acknowledge her part in forging documents and bribing officials. Commissioner Goddard received his own prison term, albeit shorter, because he cooperated with prosecutors. By then, Redwood County had a new commissioner who pledged transparency and accountability. Words that, had I heard them a year prior, might have made me cynical. Now, I clung to a sliver of hope that maybe people could indeed learn from these mistakes. Sometimes I revisited the spot where I first encountered that development gate, recalling the guard's dismissive expression when I said the land belonged to me. I remembered Penelope's office, the folder of phony documentation, the phone calls that threatened me, All of it felt like a distant storm that had finally blown over. The land was quiet again, except for the natural hum of desert life and the voices of families turning those cookie-cutter houses into genuine homes. Every so often, someone from Elmwood Springs would invite me to a barbecue or a holiday gathering. I'd show up, mingle politely, share a few stories about the ranch's history. In a surreal twist, I found myself forging friendships with individuals who lived on the plots where my father and I once roamed. It was a testament to how life moves on, weaving new threads where the old ones frayed. On a breezy evening almost 2 years after the initial court ruling, I held a small commemoration near the orchard. I invited Tyler, the older couple, Marion, George from Sage Rock, and a handful of others who helped along the way. We roasted hot dogs over a makeshift fire pit, exchanged tales of how we all got tangled in this bizarre saga, and cast occasional glances at the horizon as the sky turned a fiery orange. There was laughter, genuine and hopeful. In that instant, I understood the ranch had evolved. It was neither solely the farmland of my youth, nor just the site of a scandal. It was a place shaped by resilience. Toward the end of that evening, I found myself alone by the creek, a gentle glow from the fire reflecting off the water. My father's memory felt close. I closed my eyes, inhaled the scent of mesquite and distant creosote. The tension in my shoulders lifted. I'd done what needed to be done. The owl call sounded once more, like a soft punctuation mark on this long, tumultuous sentence of an experience. I thought about how ironically, in trying to steal my land, Penelope had triggered something far larger, an unmasking of corruption that would benefit countless people, sparing future families from the same trap. In a sense, she'd fallen into her own legal snare. As I made my way back to the group, I reflected on a final lesson. Sometimes the best traps are the ones an enemy builds for themselves, and the key to victory lies in having the fortitude to push them in without losing your own integrity. My father would have approved. He always believed that if you care for the land, if you honor the truth, and if you defend the vulnerable, the land and the truth will in turn stand by you. That night, under a sky blazing with stars, I felt that promise come full circle. No longer bound by anger, but free. Like a farmer who, after a fierce storm, finds his crops still standing. Only then does he realize just how deep the roots have grown.